Says streaming now on my
Absolutely.
side.
I'm waiting 1 second because I don't want to get an echo. All right, so this is Dan the Waterman. We are live on Entrepreneur Boulevard with Anthony Iannarino. Anthony, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody who you are and what you do?
I'm Anthony Iannarino, and I do what I do. I'm a speaker. I'm an author. I write a blog post every day. I do a YouTube show. I'm a consultant. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a father. I'm a teacher. I'm all kinds of things.
Awesome. So at what point did you realize that you were a little bit different than the norm and you're an entrepreneur and you wanted to be a business owner? At what point in your life did you realize that you were that person?
Maybe you're a little bit different, Dan. Maybe we're all normal and it's you.
Maybe.
We're all a little bit different, right? That's what makes this interesting. There's about 7.4 or 7.5 billion different people. Some of us are just driven to help and serve others in certain ways. And some people end up teaching, and some people end up, working in some sort of a spiritual role. And some people find that the way that they create value for other people is by starting a business and serving them in some other way. And ultimately, I became entrepreneurial at a relatively young age, and more entrepreneurial as time went on. And I think that that's just how different people develop. So I don't think there's any certain event. A lot of people can point to an event. I think that there's a long accumulation of new insights that we really go through that cause us to transform and change. And ultimately that for me started in 2007 when people started asking me to help them with their business. And then in 2009, when I decided to start writing a blog post every day and sharing everything I knew with the world in a very, very public place without any withholding of insight or knowledge. And then 2010, I started speaking professionally and doing more work on a larger scale. So that was sort of the path for me.
Gotcha. Awesome. So what was the first book that you wrote?
The first book I wrote was The Only Sales Guide You'll Ever Need.
So let's talk about that, because a lot of people in sales, just because you're in sales and you're a sales trainer doesn't mean you really know what you're doing, unfortunately. I think that a lot of organizations decide to put their top salesperson in a sales training capacity, and it's not necessarily the best decision for them, because they might be great in sales, but they may not be great at training. So let's talk about that book. What's that book about, and what type of person should be reading that?
That book is what is called a competency model. So what it is it takes a holistic and a complete view of what it takes to succeed in sales today. And that ends up being, in the book, 9 attributes that make up a mindset, and then 8 skills that make up the skill sets necessary. And I think the reason that the publisher named it The Only Sales Guide You'll Ever Need is because it's a very complete model. It looks at the mindset and the skill set together, and there aren't any sales books that have done that before this book. So the beginning of the book, the first half, are things like self-discipline, being able to keep the commitments that you make to yourself, and optimism, having a good attitude, and caring about other people. In fact, the first publisher that asked for the book, when they saw the chapter on caring, asked, what does that have to do with selling? And that's because the old view of sales is that it's something that you're doing to somebody. And in my view, it's something that you're doing with somebody and for somebody, and not that you're not doing that to somebody. So that's a shift for most of us just because of where we are right now. It's things like your competitive spirit, your resourcefulness, your initiative, your determination or persistence, and your willingness to be accountable for the results that you sell. Those are the things that make up the mindset. So if you're in sales, if you care about that, if you're an entrepreneur and you wonder, what do I need to be, or what do my people need to be to succeed? It starts with your mindset. And then the second half of the book is skills, specifically because to talk about these skills with someone who doesn't have the proper mindset, you're wasting your time and energy. You need to be doing both at the same time. But if you leave the mindset alone, all the skill sets in the world don't tend to help. So the skills are things like closing or asking for commitments, and prospecting, storytelling or presenting, diagnosing, negotiating, having the acumen, the business acumen to understand how to help people, understanding how to help people change, and then leadership. Those tend to be the skills that a salesperson needs. So that the first book was really a competency model to say, this is who you have to be in order to sell successfully now. So it's a who and a what do I have to do book all rolled into one.
I love it. Some people are asking for the link to the book. What's the link so I can post it?
You can go to theonlysalesguide.com, or you can just go to Amazon and search it there. It's probably in your Barnes & Noble too.
That's awesome. And then your second book is called The Lost Art of Closing, right?
Yes.
Let's talk about that, because I love talking about closing. That's kind of my my pet peeve is people that, as far as in the business world, is people that still trunk slam and try to push people into doing stuff. So let's talk about the lost art of closing. What is the lost art of closing?
Well, there was a book that came out in 1988 by Neil Rackham called Spin Selling. And in that book, what Rackham did was discover that there was sort of a pattern to conversations that you have with a client, and there were questions of varying degrees of value. So there were situation questions, what's going on, how much, how many, objective kind of things. And there were problem questions. So what problems or challenges do you have? Now, remember, this is a book that's now, getting quite old, 30 years. And then he discovered that implication questions tended to be valuable. What happens if you don't change? What happens if this continues on the way it is now? Those tend to be compelling and motivating questions. And then what's a need payoff? And that model that question is really asking the client, if we were able to correct this, what would happen? Okay, my profits would be better, blah, blah, blah. And they talk themselves into the value proposition. It's a really good model, but to me, it wasn't the most interesting part of the book, even though I loved the implications. I mean, I used the implications as soon as I discovered that, like, wait a second, it's all about the implications of not changing. I started selling better. But there's 3 pages before that in Rackham's book, starting on page 67, where he talks about an advance and a continuation. And what he noticed is that in small sales, asking for the sale over and over again, asking 5 times makes total sense because it's not strategic, there's no risk, it's not a complicated decision, so you just ask. In a complex B2B sale, the best salespeople knew that they couldn't ask for the commitment to buy because there's too much risk, it's too strategic, the client isn't prepared mentally and emotionally to make this decision. Every good rep of 34,000 sales calls that they watched got what he called a continuation. So that's what's the next step we have to take together in order to make change. And they always left a meeting with an advance. Salespeople that struggled left the meeting with a continuation, which is, Dan, great meeting you. Love everything you have to say. We'll get together at some time in the future and talk about this again. There's no commitment made.
Right.
What happened is that as the world changed and it became more competitive and more people entered markets, and more options were available, the self-oriented behaviors of always be closing, characterized by Alec Baldwin's character in Glengarry Glen Ross, people decided that it had to get softer. But then it went too far. I would say over the last decade, it turned into never be closing. Never ask the client for a commitment. Mm-hmm. They'll tell you when they're ready to take the next step. And so we got to this place where no one's asking the client to make the commitments that they need to make in order to move the deal forward. The art in selling is knowing which commitments the client needs to make and then gaining those commitments. That's what the book is about. So it's the commitment for time, which we would call prospecting. It's the commitment to explore, which we would call discovery. It's the commitment to decide that there are implications that should be causing us to change and agreeing to go down that path. There's a commitment to collaborate on solutions and then build consensus inside the company, to invest money, to review the proposal to make sure that we get it exactly right before we hand something off, and then to resolve concerns. And basically, if you can check all the boxes on that, the final close, the final ask is the easiest thing you'll ever do. If you don't do those things and you skip them, then the final ask is the most difficult thing you'll ever do. And it's totally up to you how you end up in that place. If it's difficult for you, it's because you didn't do what you needed to do before that, and the buyer's not prepared to buy and hasn't already chosen you. But if you get all of these commitments, and they're not linear, you may go back and forth between a number of them depending on the deal size. If you do that, when you get to the end, you're just going to say, Dan, it looks like we've got this right. Looks like your team's prepared to execute on it with our team. Unless you need something different, I'd like to ask you for your business, and I'd love to give you a contract so we could go ahead and get started. Is there anything else you need, or can we go ahead and put this in place? If we're there, that's easy for you.
Yep.
If we're not there and you go, gosh, I don't know, I'm not sure the solution's exactly right. Well, we didn't collaborate and we probably didn't review it to make sure. If you say, I'm not sure what my team's going to think about this, then we didn't build consensus. If you say the money's more than I thought it was, you didn't have a commitment about what the right investment should look like.
Right.
And if I didn't get a commitment to resolve the concerns, you're going, wait, is this going to work? Is it too much money? Am I going to be embarrassed by the decision that I'm making here? Should I be doing something different? Is it the right time? Because I left you alone to do those things. So this is a framework for thinking about not just closing, but how do you actually help people change? How do you help them change their results? The final commitment of the 10 is the commitment to execute. And that's after we sell something, we have to make sure that it works. And a lot of times the client or your customer won't do what they need to do on their side. And you have to go back and help them find the will and make the changes necessary to do what they need to do in order to produce the result they want. So that's the 10th commitment.
Do you think that the mindset of the consumer has changed over the last 5-10 years?
I'm really kind of a guy that goes against the grain on stuff like this. So I don't tend to look at the technological changes. I don't tend to look at that kind of thing. I tend to look for deeper, more structural things that I'm more interested in what hasn't changed.
Right.
What hasn't changed is that I'm not going to embarrass myself by buying this and having you fail. And I do think that buyers have more access to information, but that doesn't mean that they're any wiser. The
Right.
internet does not make you smarter.
I think it's the exact opposite. I think them having
It can make you dumber.
more information makes you dumber.
Well, it can also make it more confusing for them, and that means
Exactly.
they need more help. And I tell this story on stage. It's part of my keynote, but ultimately there's a difference between information and wisdom.
Yeah.
I tell a story about being sick and going on to WebMD to diagnose myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I put in all my symptoms, and I went to my doctor and I said to her, I've diagnosed this and I believe I have ovarian cancer. She said, I'm not sure you do, but I want to run some tests just to be sure. And that's the difference. I mean, you can get information, but it doesn't mean that it's right in the context of what you're trying to do. And that's the role where salespeople and people who are consultative, trusted advisors make a difference for you. It's sorting through what is noise and what is signal. What's the real context that we're looking at this so that we can decide what the right answer is.
Right. Do you feel that like the new wave of consultative salespeople is the best approach now?
I think consultative selling's been around for a long time. If I were to pick Matt Cannon's book off of the shelf behind me there, it would be the 7th edition of Consultative Selling, printed for the first time in 1970. And I mean, this has been around a long time.
Right.
The idea of somebody being a trusted advisor and being consultative, though, depending on whatever your faith tradition is, I mean, if you want to look in the Bible, you can find a lot of those people. And if you want to look at the long course of human history, there have not been leaders who did not have trusted counsel. And so this approach has been going on for thousands of years. I don't know that it's new. I would tell you that we're probably getting better at it, specifically because we're now coming in with more business acumen and more experience on how to help people change. So I don't think it's anything new, but I definitely think that we're increasing our skill set as it pertains to being able to do this, at least at the top end.
Right. I know for me, my background is in-home sales, so it's completely different than business to business. So in-home sales, up until 4 or 5 years ago, everybody was hardcore closing, always be closing, always, trying to push the button and do whatever you need to do to get the deal, like sale or jail type of mentality, right? So 4 or 5 years ago in my industry, there was a shift from being a trunk slammer to being a consultative or a consultative type of salesperson, and just taking them down the path, which I've always taken the mentality. Number one, my goal is to help the person. I don't want to just sell them something, right? So my goal is to first help them. So I sell a product, obviously, in water filtration that people need, especially where I live. The water here is horrible, but that's a whole nother rabbit trail, right? But my point is that if you take them down a path, you're asking the right questions while you're doing the sales process, which you have to have an actual process, right? Because a lot of times I see companies that they may be doing well, but they don't have a process in place. All of their sales reps are just kind of all over the place, and they have no idea what the process is. So what do you think about that? How do you feel about companies that are doing okay, but they don't have like a real sales process to train their people?
I had a guy, before we put a new patio on the back of the house, I had a guy come in and he had a big binder about his company with him. And he started talking about, what we would do. And he asked a number of questions. He said, does my company look like the kind of company you want to do business with?
Sure.
And then he said, am I the kind of person that you would want to buy from?
Sure.
And then he asked, if money wasn't an object, would you buy this patio and put it on now?
Mm.
And those were really interesting questions to me. So the question that he asked about, is my company the kind of company that you want to buy from? I had to say, I still don't have any idea who your company is or what your values are, or why I should choose you over someone else. So I'm not sure.
Right.
Am I the kind of person? I just met you. You're sitting in my kitchen, but the kind of person that would ask this question probably isn't the kind of person that I would buy from, because that's not a good question for me where I am in this buying process. And then he went to, if price wasn't an object, and I said,
but it is.
Price isn't an object. I have the cash to buy whatever I want and put it on the back of the house right now. And he left without a sale because he wasn't working on my preferences. He was working on trying to sell me. And what he should have been working on is, what are your preferences? Right. So we had another person come to the house, and that person looked and said, what do you see here? What is this going to look like? What color does it need to be? You're talking about having it stamped. What does this stamp look like? Do you have something in mind? Do you want to see what some choices might look like? And then can I show you some things that we've done that might match what you're looking at, so you can give me your opinion? And he was very consultative, and he spent a lot of time explaining, we'll probably do this in a different way, and here's why. And ultimately, he made it very easy to buy from, because he was working very hard to figure out how to give us what we wanted and not how to sell us. So the selling part, there's this paradox, or this dichotomy that goes on. The harder you're trying to sell, the less selling you're doing. And the harder you try to work to help people, the more selling you're doing. So there's people who say things like, Dan, you should never try to sell people. Okay, well, what does selling mean? To you, it means the first guy that came to my house. That's what people mean. But you should be trying to sell people like the second guy that came to my house. The second guy was there to serve us and to figure out, how do I help these people get what they want? That's selling. So it just depends on your definition. If you live in 1968 and you haven't grown up, then you think the first way is what selling means, but it doesn't mean that anymore.
Right. It doesn't work.
It's funny, because I teach a class at Capital University occasionally on professional selling. And I ask the students to raise their hand if their parent works in sales, after they give me all the negative words that they have for salespeople. And invariably, I'll zero in on 2 or 3 whose moms work in sales. And I'll say these words like pushy, manipulative, selfish, self-oriented, makes people buy things they don't need. I'm like, that's your mom? And they're like, no, my mom's not like that at all. Our clients love her. And I'm like, really? Well, you just told me that salespeople are all these things.
Mm-hmm.
And your mom must be a selfish bitch, right? And they're like, no, not my mom. I love my mom. Our clients love her. And I'm like, I know. You know, we in professional selling, we haven't been that way for decades now. I mean, most of us are softer than we need to be and not direct enough about being consultative and controlling the process. But the fact of the matter is the stereotype just persists because of a very small group of salespeople who still give people those experiences to remind them of what sales once was.
Right. I know that honesty for people in this day and age, people love honesty. Like one of the first things I do when I go in someone's house is I tell them I'm going to ask them for their business, right? But I do it in a way that by the end, they really forget that I said I'm going to ask them for their business, right? Because I'm a consultant to them. My goal is to find out what they need. I want to find out what they're worried about in their water. What are their goals as far as removing chemicals from their water, right? And I'm going to figure out whatever product they're looking for, not my own agenda, right? And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong is when they go in a house or they go in a business, they have tunnel vision. They have this agenda to try to sell people the way that they want to be sold. But people are going to tell you how to sell them if you listen, right?
There's no doubt about it. I mean, they're going to work with you if you're working with them, and they'll make it very easy. They'll disclose their preferences and tell you what they need, and look for help.
So besides, and maybe I'm wrong here, right? You're obviously been in sales longer than I have. I believe that sales or that money is the only real objection. There's other reasons why people don't buy, right? Like you didn't create enough value, or they don't trust you, or they want to do research on your company. But ultimately, money is the real objection. What do you think about that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think for many people who don't have money, it's a very, very real concern. And I don't even think of objections anymore. I only think about what's the real concern. The objection is the words that they give me because they don't want to tell me what their real concern is.
Right.
Now's not a good time. That's money. That's probably money.
Right.
I'm not sure I need to talk this over. There's another concern behind that. And I think you have to be able to address the real concern for people. And in a consumer sale like you're in, perhaps most of them lead to money. That could be true.
So business to business, you feel is different, maybe?
Business to business is, I can't get the 8 people who need to agree to this in a room together, let alone get a decision made. I don't know that this is our highest priority because I don't even know what our highest priority should be right now. We really need to do this, but I'm not sure we have the ability to execute it right now because we don't have the time to have the organization do all these other things. I think there's tons of concerns. I'm afraid of what my boss is going to think if this fails. It's the
Right.
devil I know is easier than the devil I don't know. And you're creating risk for me and uncertainty that you haven't overcome. I think there's lots and lots of reasons that people, real concerns. Those are real concerns. That's not, I don't have the money. There are tons of companies in B2B where they have plenty of money and they're not spending it because they don't have the certainty to spend the money. They still have unresolved concerns. And they'll say things like, I don't know if now is a good time. Okay, that's an objection. What's the real concern? We're not convinced that this is the right thing for us to do right now. We're not convinced that this is the right investment for us to make. We're not convinced we can get the rest of the team to execute what we're talking about. We don't really want to fire our friends and have to have an uncomfortable conversation with the partner we've used for 12 years. I mean, there's lots of other things that can pop up that you have to be able to figure out and help people resolve. That's why that's a whole commitment, I think. That's a commitment to say, let's talk about what you should be concerned about.
Right. So what approach should like business to business salespeople watch? Because we have 25 people watching right now. So I'm sure some of them are in business to business sales. So when you go into an office or you go into a business, what's the approach? Like, what should people be saying?
It depends on, is it my first meeting?
Sure.
I mean, if I'm selling water filtration, I'm going to say, what I'd like to share with you is 4 trends that we're seeing in water right now that are going to impact the quality of your water, number one. And depending on what the water is being used for, if it's for human consumption, that should give you grave concerns. And I want to share this with you and explore whether or not you think there's something we should do and get your opinion on this. And then I'm probably going to start with a presentation to say, Dan, did you know that there are right now in the drinking water that you're drinking, every single human drug that's being prescribed in microscopic doses inside that water? So literally right now there is morphine, there's Prozac, there's Viagra, and in very, very, very small amounts. But there's not been one longitudinal study yet to explore what are the repercussions of all of us taking every drug that everyone else is taking because it's in the water supply. Did you know that? That's a fact. I'm not making that up. That is an actual fact that everything is in the water. Mm-hmm. Because I want to first explore, do we have a reason to change? And if you say, well, I'm really not comfortable drinking all the drugs that other people are taking. Okay. Me either. That's why water filtration now is a big deal.
Yep.
So I'm going to start with a conversation about, here's some things that are going on in the world. Let's talk about what they mean in your world, if they mean anything at all. So explore. I want to explore change. And then if you say, look, I'm interested in that, then I'm going to say, let's explore what some possibilities might be for you. And that's the second commitment, is explore. What does change look like? If they say I want to do something, then I have the commitment to change. And then I'm going to say, well, let's figure out what the right answer is here. Right. Do you need a reverse osmosis water filtration system? I'm going to talk about whatever makes sense to say, this is probably the highest quality outcome I can get you. Here's a range of things in between. What are your concerns? And there's different water filtration solutions for different things, right? Human consumption is one thing. Mm-hmm. For industrial use is another standard, right? So there's lots of areas to talk about. In a home, it's human consumption for the most part,
right?
But that's the starting point for the conversation. Is if you're going to be consultative, I continue to say this over and over again on podcasts. There's only 2 things you need to be a trusted advisor: trust and advice. And if you don't have the advice, you're not a trusted advisor. So you have to know things. That's the starting point for the conversation.
I like that you're educated in water a bit.
Water's scary.
It is. It can be, for sure.
Yeah, no, it is. It's scary. There's a lot of bad things in water.
Yep. Yep.
Not in this water, though, because what's in this water is coffee. And that's what counts most of all.
Love it. So do you have any last minute advice to give the people that are watching? I know 4 or 5 people said they're going to go and buy your book. So that's good.
Thank you for that. I would tell you the thing that I'm probably most convinced is the differentiator between salespeople who succeed and who don't succeed are a lot of intangibles. So the one thing that I can tell you is, first, be somebody who it's worth doing business with in the first place. Be somebody that takes care of other people and you serve them, and then you just make it easy to buy from you. That's the best advice I can give you. After that, get the mindset, get the skill set, get the toolkits, read the books. But the best thing to do is to be somebody that people want to work with anyway, and be their trusted advisor. And you just have to embody that and say, I'm the person that cares deeply and understands how to help, and that's what I'm here to do. And then you just make the whole game easy.
So first step is to be someone that people want to do business with.
Yeah.
Second step, you said mindset?
Yeah, you got to have the right mindset. And then skill set. You'll get all of that in both of my books. I mean, there's a lot of mindset in the book because there has to be. You have to do this from an other-oriented place where you're really trying to serve other people. Makes it much easier.
What's the link to the Lost Art of Closing?
TheLostArtOfClosing.com.
Oh, that's simple.
That's going to take you to Amazon.
Okay. I will make sure I get my copies today as well.
Yeah, and if you love it, give me a review. We are at, I think, 56 5-star reviews out of 56 reviews. And if you read the reviews, you'll get an idea of how people are using the results or the book to produce better results.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate you jumping on. Been on for 30 minutes, so I wanted to keep it short to respect your time, because you gave us about an hour a couple weeks ago. So I really appreciate it, man.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Guys, if you want to check out his books, make sure you go to theonlysalesguy.com, thelostartofclosing.com. You can connect with Anthony on Facebook, LinkedIn, I'm sure all over the place. So make sure to do that. So have a good one, man. I appreciate you.
Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.
Yep. Bye-bye.